Today we have two great experts, of which both of them I had the great pleasure of working with in the not either currently or in the not too distant past. One is Aneta Pilch from Universal Investment. She is the country manager and global head of Poland for Universal Investment, and has built up a shared services organization there from scratch, and making it very customer focused. And she will share a lot of her experiences and learning with you guys. And the other great expert is Mariano, who is now with Moody's and running their shared services business, plus a lot of other things. He is the country manager for Lithuania, and I had the pleasure of working with Mariano back in the times at Barclays when we ramped up the shared services organization in Lithuania there a couple of years back, and we worked together very closely in that capacity. So with both of them, I share a lot of common good memories and business challenges and things we are working on together. And they are great experts in their field, and therefore we are super privileged and lucky to have them, because this is where the real expertise comes into fruition, when you do not have people talking about it who are far away from it, but those who are right in the middle and experiencing it from an operational as well as from a strategic perspective. So you're going to hear more from them in a couple of minutes. So before we now go into the poll and ask you the first questions, let me just share with you some very brief thoughts on key trends we are seeing in regards to shared services, or in general terms, key trends we see which are having a big impact on shared services. And actually, when Mariano and Aneta and I were in the preparation of today's session, we're discussing it, we actually thought, well, if you want to be provocative, you could actually ask the question, is shared services a concept of the past? Is it actually still needed in today's business environment anymore? Right? Has it outlived itself? Or is there still a real value add? Well, certainly things we're going to be discussing, we believe there is some, provided we address some of those big topic areas and key trends which are there, because if we don't address them, then I think the risk is that it would be a concept of the past. So I think it's on us to shape it and define it in the right way. So what are some of those key trends as we see it? Well, one big one is certainly automation. So everything around RPA, robotics, and AI. We all know it's a big, big topic area, and I won't go into any detail. However, it's quite interesting when you look at it, to what extent automation is really widely used in shared services. There are quite a lot of studies out there which are showing that actually the use of robotics and AI in shared services is actually not very well advanced and developed, which is a surprise, because actually this is where the real big use cases would be. So I was recently reading one of those studies which were saying that only 30% of shared service centers are making appropriate use of it to a significant extent. So it's a big opportunity gap, we would call it. The other thing is that there's a lot of things where shared services is still more on the reporting side of things. So with SLAs and KPIs and just working processes through, instead of really moving up the value chain towards predictive analytics. So also here, we believe some big gaps, and there are opportunities there which can be grasped. Well, then the next one is new ways of working. Also here, the pandemic has just accelerated something which was already on the horizon and developing. So flexible working models, hybrid working models. I think what the pandemic has shown was something which almost none of us have expected to that significant degree. I was working a good year ago with a company in Germany, which was running a real proper contact center, right? So telephony contact center, hundreds of people are working there. And with a matter of 3 weeks, we have sent the whole telephone contact center, shared service center, into remote working. And beforehand, right, since years, the organization tried to do a bit of flexible working, and the Works Council was pushing, and nobody was kind of having the courage to go for it. And we were able to overcome all hurdles, whether it's GDPR challenges, whatever. And the interesting thing was then they were all working from remote, and the productivity in the first 2 months went up. And you have nice productivity measures in contact centers, as you all know. So productivity went up. And only thereafter, so after 2-3 months, it went back to the original levels prior to the pandemic, and then since then stabilized always more or less roughly from a performance perspective as before. So you could actually say, why do you need to sit all in a shared service center physically if right, the whole thing actually can work on a fully remote basis? So quite interesting observations here. So let's discuss what your experiences are in that area, and what you believe are future models of how these new ways of working actually are shaping shared services in the future. And the third big trend we're seeing is the importance of culture, purpose, and ESG. And it's again another big topic area, but just to look at it through one lens, through two lenses, sorry. One is, we all know that Generation Y, Generation Z are having some different expectations in regards to a purpose-driven organization. Many of us know the great work from Lalou on spiral dynamics and so on. So the question is, many organizations are reshaping and redefining itself culturally and organizationally. So what does that mean for a shared service environment? Are shared services organizations reflecting that and looking at it, through that lens, to reflect the way how the company cultures might be evolving, and is it properly mirrored, or is it detached from that? And the other big trend in that area is ESG. We currently see that the focus on sustainability and on reporting what the ESG measures are for companies are shifting beyond just the very big global corporates to all those mid-sized businesses, right? In the past, it has only been a few of those mid-sized businesses who were, just being led by people who thought themselves that this is a big topic. Nowadays, most of the private equity companies, for instance, they require their portfolio businesses to apply a full and formal ESG agenda. So what does that mean in a shared services environment in regards to becoming carbon neutral, for instance? Right? Or how do you then help shaping the overall ESG agenda from a shared services perspective for the wider business? So what is the role shared services is playing there? Well, a lot of questions, and look, I'm afraid I can't give you all the answers, but we want to stimulate further dialogue, hear from Mariano, Aneta, and of course, want to hear from you. And hand over now the word to Mariano. Who will take us through, first introduce himself a tiny bit, and then take us through his insights for today's session. Mariano.
Very good, Christoph. Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Mariano Andrade. I am currently the country manager for Moody's Lithuania. I recently moved to Moody's, recently 2 years ago, after spending nearly six and a half years at Barclays. I'm not Lithuanian by origin. I was born and raised in Mexico, but I've been living in Europe for about 25 years. Recently, when I spoke to Christoph about today's event, he asked me the key question, how are you doing at Moody's, Mariano? The first thing that came to my mind was, Christoph, you don't know what kind of cultural shock I got between moving from a British company into an American company, both in financial services, both with big names, big brands, and yet so different approach to shared services and the way they should be shaped up, the value that that brings to one company versus the other one, and the organization structure inside inside each of those two corporations having quite a significant different approach. Both of them talking quite similarly, though. Both of them speaking a lot about RPA, so automation, artificial intelligence, digitalization, transformational journey. The conversation remains to be quite similar in both companies, yet the impact on what we're doing in the background is significantly different. So I definitely agreed today to share my experience with you in regards to that culture of the culture of an organization, the culture that we see in financial services, and how that impacts significantly the way you're going to be shaping up the future of a shared service. Equally important to talk about how the purpose of the organization, in this case, Moody's being just recently, by the way, 2 weeks ago, we celebrated that for the first time in over 100 years of existence. We belong to the Fortune 500 company. So, the first thought that came through my mind when I saw that announcement is like, okay, we made it to the Fortune 500. There is no way on earth the culture is going to change that easy when we're doing so well. It's not going to be that easy to influence a cultural shift in an organization that is making so much progress and is growing continuously. And then the importance on purpose, as I was mentioning, what is the purpose of the organization and how that purpose really translates to the employee experience and to the shared services perspective, right? Because we tend to build a purpose that impacts our shareholder value and impacts our external customer, but has very little to do with the way as employees are felt, or how the transformation is going to impact their experience in working for Moody's. And then the third topic that I shared with Christophe, which I will add up with a little bit of humor as well, is on the ESGs. And I will share this part that hopefully is going to make you laugh. But Moody's shared a few months ago that in 2020, for the first time, we became carbon neutral. We did this through a couple of carbon offsets, but the part that made me laugh, and I think is going to bring you a little bit of a smile in your face, is when I read that we did the procurement of green energy for 100% of our operations globally, which is true. We are operating now all offices with green energy. We have the contracts and we have the ways to measure that. But then I asked the CFO, how did we manage to be carbon neutral with the green energy when we're all working from home? So, the green energy procurement impact the office, but nobody has 11,000 employees have not shown up to the office in 14 months. So how did we achieve that? I think we very quickly corrected that statement in the website. Nevertheless, what I want to take you a deeper dive is on the cultural side. So if we could move to the next slide so I can start articulating what at least it means for me in my experience, working with different types of different style of leadership. I used to report to Christophe a few years ago, by the way, when we were working together in Barclays, and that had a tremendous impact on myself, from my perspective of looking at how a leader is going to make a significant impact in changing the culture of an organization to then drive change. And that's probably what what I got a little bit of a shock when I came to Moody's, when I realized that the culture is not there. When I see the culture that we have inside the organization is very collaborative, absolutely, is very engaging, absolutely, is very diverse and inclusive, no doubt about it. We're very proud about all those cultural values. But when it comes to shape up the business on shared services, we are really far away from the reality, I would say, is where we need to have a reality shock and put the feet on the ground. I hear very often in the office, this is low value add, and my first question to them is, so why do we do it? If it's low value, then don't do it, right? There is not such a thing in shared services as low value. There are ways of improving and making it more efficient, but if you have the culture of thinking low value, low cost, then you're missing the game. It's like that low value, low cost It is a thing of the 20th century, and where we are right now, we should be moving far more closer to create an inclusive experience for employees. And that means if you're going to go through an HR process or a payroll process or a compliance process, it should be a very, very similar experience to you. It should have a clear beginning and a clear end. It should not have handoffs. It should have accountability inside the organization, and it should make you part of an organization that is working for you as well as you are working with them. Partnering with employees, that's something that you rarely see. What I have observed over the years is that organizations tend to go with an agenda on change and the digital transformation that we have heard already for over a decade, and the simplification and lean and agile and you name it. You have gone through so many different methodologies in the background. But how many of us have actually used the partnering with employees to actually shape up that service or shape up that product and actually deliver something that is driven with science in the background and with data? It is actually quite rare, in my opinion. You do have focus groups, you do have a few people that get engaged, but you have huge data in the background. And recently, I will put you a very clear example. We do an employee survey, an employee business engagement survey every year. And I was pointing out recently that the results to my eyes, they struck me as very similar for the last few years. And we focus very much on the positives, which I think is great to highlight the positives. But the positives have been the same positives for the last 4 years, while the negatives also remain to be the same. And I thought, why are we not talking first about this area, this red area that we need to change? And we need to focus on. And more importantly, I started thinking, how many employees across the globe have left the organization because we have done very little change in that red area? And could we use a clever algorithm, a clever AI tool to start correlating the attrition towards the insatisfaction areas of the employee survey? And we're working on that. I'm pretty sure that we shouldn't be surprised. There will be a correlation there, and the challenge is that you see very little change towards the negative, because the leadership told me, but it is not growing negatively neither. And I was, yes, but it's because how many people that complained about it last year are no longer here. And yet you have a number of new employees replacing those that left, and the positives are also not growing. So it's quite stable. So I think you're in for a surprise when you start looking into the correlation in between the negatives and the people that have left, and how much have we neglecting that message? How much cost hidden is there in the attrition, rather than trying to simplify a process that is too complex to simplify now? You should fix the foundation. Aligning and empowering leaders. In my perspective, that's another area where we're missing the game. The alignment and empowerment is not really there. You have the job titles and you have the hierarchies and structures under them, but how much empowering you're giving to leaders to make decisions and to make sure that they are in the not only in the hierarchical side, but they get to experience and expose themselves into the change that the organization is trying to influence. How much of that alignment is happening between the structures that you draw in paper versus the actual operational operational day-to-day on any office. Generating energy and excitement. I think we do a pretty good job there in LinkedIn and in Facebook and in the internal tools to communicate with people what we're doing about it. We do a lot of hackathons. We do have a lot of engagement methodologies inside the organization to go about it. What it struck me as well as quite interesting is that we do a lot of that session, like hackathons to innovate, and we do hackathons in fintech, we do hackathons in the rating business, we do hackathons in shared services, trying to find out a process that could be improved. What I was very shocked about is that we tend to praise a lot the staff that has been involved in it, and we give a good word on the good ideas that has been shared. Not a single one, at least that I could trace back in the last 5 years, Not a single one has been implemented. So how can you maintain that energy and that excitement if you cannot inspire to look teams to focus on curiosity and really drive innovation if you don't do anything about the activities that you're doing internally? So that's an opportunity that we're missing. And testing and adapting continuously. That's another part that the organizations are very scared of, and I think is mainly because of the cost. You know, when you start talking about can we experiment and test and then adapt, the first question is, you know, we don't have the budget for it, we don't have the resources for it. You have to try to go with the flow as best as you can, and you end up doing half journey transformations or transformations that miss the point, and you end up covering that with pretty words on something that was very successful, even if the process in the background remains to be a mess. So Christoph mentioned at the very beginning a few interesting questions around AI, around robotics, around you know, are we relevant as a shared service center? Is it really a future for us still out there? From the culture perspective, I will tell you, as long as the culture doesn't really change to enable a shared service center to move towards an innovative way of disrupting itself and making sure that we get to drive the customer needs, the internal customer needs and internal customer feedback into actionable outcomes. We're going to continue talking about automation and we will never see it because it's too expensive. Or because it doesn't really drive that much efficiencies when you need to just switch the people between picking up the phone and hiring, instead of this person, you hire an engineer that is going to be creating the bot. So from my perspective, the change, the opportunity is there if we would manage to square how we influence a quick change in culture to make those key decisions, having those tough conversations around the processes that shouldn't be there or could be done better, and only then start talking around technology. From my perspective, you first fix the foundation on the processes, design them correctly, and then you underpin them with the technology that is going to really drive a fun experience. Should we be afraid of losing jobs? I mean, I don't know. Recently, I attended a meeting with a person that calls himself a futurologist, and he said, imagine if we all do the same at the same time. You know, what will be the future of the economy? You know, if 40% of the people will lose their jobs because we simplify or we automate too much, what's the future there? I don't think we should be too afraid of that, but I do think that we need to change the culture in order to drive that technological innovation with good processes and good foundations to begin with. And that drives me into the purpose. A purpose-driven organization is going to make sure that the culture can change better. You know, a good purpose-driven organization is going to enable the behaviors that will really drive that cultural change. And a purpose-driven organization starts from the top, and I think the top needs to be very engaged. The CEO of the organization needs to roll up the sleeves and put a purpose, and then show by example what that purpose is going to be driven by, and how we're going to be achieving that purpose. Why do we exist, and how are we going to go about that change? And is correlated into the topic on ESGs. For example, if we talk about the ESGs and just think about what Christoph was mentioning, the portfolio that some of the companies need to show that they will have a ESG solution or an ESG investment in the background, is going to be there. I had lunch yesterday with the American ambassador in Lithuania, and we were talking a little bit about the ESGs, and we were talking a lot about the fundamental change that needs to be empowered and from where it should come. So he asked me a very simple question. He said, do you think it is the government that needs to influence the change into the ESGs? Do you think is that the Paris climate change agreement that is going to make a difference? Or should we think a lot more about the private sector? And I think the answer there is the private sector, right? The private sector is the one that is generating ideas, is the one that generates wealth, is the one that generates change. So if the private sector starts putting serious emphasis on ESGs and we start talking about disclosures, just like we have done in some countries in the past with the gender pay gap. As soon as you start having disclosures, you start taking action. Right, and those disclosures needs to be very transparent with key metrics around what is it that you're measuring your carbon footprint. And as I mentioned before, making the joke that we made the mistake of making that statement that we are procuring green energy across all our offices, which is true, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, there is a lot more on how much kilowatts of energy are we using with the technology in the background. There is a lot more around what materials are we using to dispose, for example, our confidential mail. You know, some offices were incinerating that. So from one way you're procuring green energy, and on the other one you're incinerating paper in the parking lot. So there is my key takeaways from you is culture remains to be a topic that is underlooked and needs to be addressed correctly. If you want to talk about ESGs from the shared service perspective, you need to think about disclosures. You need to start having a good way of accounting for your energy, the way employees move to the office and so forth. And I think we should rely a lot less on governments making change and influencing that change from the private sector, leading by example, taking risks into making decisions that are going to be good for the future and good for the planet.
The two slides we have from Aneta, and I'd like to hand over to Aneta, who is a great colleague and great person to work with at Universal. And well, over to you, Aneta.
Thanks, Christoph, very much. So just a short intro. So I do work for Universal Investment. I was the fortunate general manager that I was the first branch employee. You know, everything that in the past working for UBS and HSBC, which are huge corporate organizations, everything that I was talking that I wanted to do, I actually had a chance to do it. And this is amazing. This is anything and everything that I could have asked for. So when we when we were building up a branch in Poland, in Krakow, for Universal Investment, we made it a very conscious decision to, from a market differentiation perspective, to say to all of our candidates that we are not a shared service and we are not a BPO. And probably I will leave you with this. I want to go into a detail, but I have two slides that I wanted to share with you. One is on a major qualitative change in the sector that we do see, and I think everybody that has experienced services, this is organic. And then the second topic would be around kind of innovation and intelligent automation topic. So, you know, when we look at the development of shared services over the last 20 years or so, you know, it did start with lower complexity activities that had a great potential to be centralized and standardized, and hopefully in a very cost-effective location. And this is what all major players have done, leveraging global footprint strategies, where you actually defined which activities have to be done in which locations, where the access to talent is. A lot of companies have invested in follow the sun models to make sure that they have operations 24/7. But what I'm going to say, and I think everybody knows, you know, these companies have grown tremendously, and I'm going to say size does not matter, content does. So when we look in terms of the evolution of the service centers, there's a major shift and there is a major push to no longer look at the size. It's no longer a qualitative, actually probably the bigger you are, the bigger criticism there is, because you should be automating and reducing and eliminating activities to reduce the size, but content does. And some real data, which comes from the newest 2021 report of Associated Business Service Leaders, says that 54% of the business service sector actually claims that they have knowledge-intensive processes. So, which is no longer just a simple operational activities on F&A or accounting or procurement, but it does involve a little bit of judgment and recommendation or even advisory topics. And what that morphs into is that those shared services that would like to move on on a value chain get into a higher level of complexity, they need to get into a far better understanding of the business issues and having really authentic relationships. So going back to Mariano's presentation about the culture and understanding business, that actually drives value. Self-critical, because I've been part of the sector since 2007 in Krakow, and I have seen, one company grow from 5 to 5,000, and the other company that I was at from 500 to almost 5,000. We focused on probably important things at that point in time, but we did lose sight of what business wants and what business needs. We focused on recruitment, we focused on governance, we focused on supervision, we focused on SLAs and KPIs. And please don't get me wrong, they're all imperative because they drive transparency, which is so important when you move processes and people out. But we probably ask way too many questions in terms of how we manage ourselves versus how we manage the business or for the client. And something that I'll move on to the colorful diagram on the bottom of the slide. And years ago, there's this anecdote. I was actually struggling with one of the relationships and with business expectations. And it's very easy for all of our business leaders to say, collaborate. We have to collaborate far better. But nobody really explains how challenging and how difficult true collaboration is. And I had an amazing coach at that point in time, and I know I was driving in the car, and she told me, and I drew the picture in my head. And then, of course, I found the picture, but I can recreate that picture very often. And if you can see, I know it's a small print, it kind of matches relationships or ability to cooperate with the level of assertiveness. So here, it dawned on me that when we are asking ourselves to collaborate, and when we're asking our people, our teams to collaborate, we are asking them implicitly to have just amazing relationships with the business, and then having enough knowledge, competence, and assertiveness. And I would say a lot of confidence, which is built on merit and not on superficial knowledge, to be able to sit at the table and being able to collaborate. And in my years, so it's been over 17 years, I have seen a lot of people either be far more accommodating, and I think this is a criticism that has been sent in the direction of shared services, that they're more on execution side, more accommodating. Very often, and my previous teams always know that when we had a question about who the customer is, a lot of people in shared services said, well, it's my business team. And very few would say it's the end customer. But shared services have been traditionally more towards more of being accommodating. Very few on avoidance. I mean, you can't really avoid certain issues. Also, probably not around competition, although when it comes to values, I think that there probably would be a case. But this collaboration is incredibly important. And until the moment that I actually was able to break that down, then I knew that in order to lead my teams into doing something far more complex, sitting at the table and moving away from pure execution, but to more advisory or more solution building and solution development topic, we really needed to have really solid relationships and confidence, which is built on merit, knowledge of the business, and knowledge of the real business problems. Next topic, yes, it is about people. Now, shared services have been priding, and so the entire sector was incredibly proud. And I probably took part in 100 demonstrations or presentations about how we have been incredibly successful in developing large centers. And I remember very well a slide that recited how many masters and how many PhDs we have. And a lot of you will probably recognize this, but it's high 90% of people with masters and PhDs. And the question is, how long did we have to wait to realize that these people, very well educated and with aspirations, and that have been now able to observe global businesses, if they will want to continue performing low complexity activities? So if we ask, are we really leveraging our talent, which is a rhetorical question, but are we really leveraging the talent and the potential of the employees within a shared service, the answers are probably mixed. Yes, on some occasions, yes, we did, but on a lot of other occasions, we focused on micro movements versus a major shift into higher complexity topics. I think the trend is very positive, and I think this is one of the major qualitative changes in the sector, where we will see a drive for increased complexity, but that needs to come with solid business understanding and definitely with far more confidence. And then I love COVID. I know not from a health and epidemiology perspective, but COVID has been a major accelerator of a lot of topics. I don't know if some of you have seen it on LinkedIn. There was a survey question: who drove your latest IT transformation? And it was CFO, CIO, or COVID, and of course COVID was circled. COVID, I think COVID has. And I know Mariano and Christoph, you mentioned that as well in your intro. COVID has made some, not all, but some impossible things possible. It helped us to sit at the table and think about rationale of certain things. And that leads me to my all-time favorite belief that a little bit of controlled crisis is incredibly beneficial. So that's on qualitative changes. Now, one very specific qualitative change from the sector is the topic around innovation per se. And of course, when we think about innovation, it's not only RPA, it's not only IPA, which is intelligent process automation, but it is about mindset. And again, that influence. If I would have to form a master thesis or PhD thesis, I think I would write it on influence in the shared service sector and how imperative it is to the future development. So I did some analysis on the data and in some of the studies, and the percentage that you see, 73% of surveyed employees have declared to have introduced one or more ideas in 3 years. It was presented as a success, and I'm thinking that's actually very sad. That statistics is not impressive at all. So then a question is, why is it? Why do we really struggle with the fact of shared services actually driving some of the innovation topic? And probably the next number, the big 46% answer it somehow. The study also suggested that only about, not even half of the shared service centers own their own R&D budget for innovation. They do heavily rely on what business topics and large transformational projects do deliver. And they're kind of embedded. So shared services with its functional structures, from a business, from R&D perspective, from HR perspective, finance, operations, IT, software development, they're actually highly fragmented, and they're embedded within the functions. Therefore, any approach or expectations from a shared service to have a sustainable change on innovation probably should be funded. And then looking at one more number, only about 63% of companies claim that when they use intelligent process automation, they use it successfully, but it does not lead to a job reduction. Now, a lot of you have probably seen or have managed change projects or have observed that RPA programs or automation agenda is top of the list for shared services. But then when you ask about what is the headcount impact or what is the financial impact on what is the process elimination impact, this is where the answers and the reports get vague. People claim we have implemented 5,100 robots, but we don't really see an impact from a job loss perspective yet. Theoretically, of course, we should see that lower complexity gets fully automated or eliminated, and then the remaining population should focus on the higher complexity topics. And the big question probably for all of us as people that are attached in one way or another is, why is it? Is it the support? And I have noticed from our survey question, Christoph, in the beginning, if I have noted correctly, only 30% of you on the call, and I think we had about 77% response rate, if I'm correct. But only 30% of you have claimed that you have sufficient support for innovation / RPA. So if you don't have a budget and you don't have support in terms of either process designers or actually developers that can sit with the end users and to map it, it's probably worth linking those two facts. Budget, again, not even half have their own budget to drive innovation agenda. And the one that I like particularly a lot is this optimism trap. And Christoph laughed when he heard that, but I think it's very true. We have been, over the last 15, 17 years in the sector, we have been so great at patting ourselves for doing a great job. And very often, increased scale, so going from 500 to 5,000 in 5 years was that success criteria. And I have a theory here that we fell into optimism trap, that we are so good that we actually don't need to do far more, and yet we do. From a content and complexity perspective, that we don't have that natural sense of urgency to push certain topics forward. We have become incredibly comfortable in complex structures and supervision layers that we have established in shared services to monitor processes that our experts do. 4 eye checks, 6 eye checks, 8 eye checks, instead of actually getting it right the first time around. And then the last thought from me, and I promise, Christoph, this is the last comment that I will say, is a lot of these economies in the last 15 years, let's say, have moved away from being emerging economies to developed. And countries and policymakers and governments, especially those that really want to drive innovation topic, they need to make sure that that is translated and that is cascaded through its organs and through administration and policymaking as well. It's very difficult to build up an innovation economy. I don't think private sector will succeed with this by themselves. It definitely needs support, but I can definitely speak for Poland. I don't know, Mariano, if you can speak about Lithuania, but I have also colleagues in other CE countries. That move from an emerging emerging economy to a developed economy has not sunk in yet. That there's different skills, different competencies, different schooling systems, different policies that need to be in place in order to take full advantage of what was beautifully built as we were merging into more developed economies. And that is all from me. This is what I wanted to share with you. But just to summarize, I think shared services, large or small, should really think about how do I, as an owner of my team, my department, my unit, my center, how do I move up on that qualitative challenge? How do I get closer to the business? How do I get closer to the client? And by client, I mean the end client. I don't mean the team that has moved processes over. And then again, potential of automation and improvement, but a real one. Thank you.
Wow, great insights, Aneta, and thank you so much for sharing. And certainly your recollection is correct. That there was not even 30% saying that they have the right, resources and tools at their hand.
I just don't think it's fair, Christoph. Yeah, we ask people to innovate, we ask people to do automation, yet if we don't offer the needed support, that's just probably not very effective.
I think that is one of the things where we need to, raise our voice much louder in regards to if that is the key thing to drive, and we all believe it is, and there are great opportunities, then we'll need to just take it in the end and move it ahead and forward. And I think the challenge will be then not to be falling into that small business case traps where you then look at it just to a limited sense, but really drive an automation and innovation agenda which will fueling itself. And if we do that one, and then add that one to your comments on, well, you go into a more developed environment, and then thinking about that in the mid to long term, automated processes will be, fully replaced from a human interaction perspective by some robots and intelligent process automation. Then I think that has to be the way to go. in my view. So, well, that was great insights.